Welcome to our channel. This is not just a story about art. This is not just a story about pain. This is the story of a woman who had every reason to give up. But she chose to rise, again and again. She didn't ask the world for permission. She didn't wait for love or health or luck. She turned her broken body into strength, and her sadness into color. She was betrayed, forgotten, destroyed. But the world could never ignore her soul. Today, we'll walk into the fire she lived in, feel every tear, every scream, every heartbeat, and learn English through the language of courage. This is the incredible true story of Frida Kahlo, the woman who painted her pain and became immortal. This story is perfect for your English because it's told in simple, emotional language. You'll learn how to understand real feelings, improve your vocabulary, and connect deeply with every word while enjoying a powerful life story. It's not just English practice. It's English with emotion, meaning, and memory. Let's begin. Part 1. The Girl Who Was Born. Twice. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in Coyoacán, a small town near Mexico City. But she always said, "I was born in 1910, the year of the Mexican Revolution." Because she didn't want to be just a girl. She wanted to be part of a revolution. Her full name was Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderón. Her father, Guillermo Kahlo, was a German photographer. Her mother, Matilde, was Mexican. Strong, religious, and very strict. Frida was the third of 4 daughters, but she felt different from the beginning. She was wild, curious. She played with boys, climbed trees, fought like a warrior. At just 6 years old, Frida's life changed forever. She got a disease called polio, a virus that attacks the body. One of her legs became thin and weak. Kids laughed at her. They called her Frida the peg leg. But Frida didn't cry. Instead, she ran, she boxed, she swam like a shark, faster than the boys. Her father, who also had health problems, became her best friend. He taught her photography, painting, and how to read philosophy books. And when the world felt unfair, he told her, "You are stronger than life itself." At 15, Frida entered the National Preparatory School, one of the best schools in Mexico. Out of 2,000 students, only 35 were girls. Frida was one of them. She was smart, loud, funny, and full of dreams. She wanted to become a doctor to help people. But fate had other plans. Frida joined a group of rebellious students called Los Cachuchas. They made fun of teachers, acted in plays, read poetry, and debated politics. She fell in love with books, ideas, and for the first time, she saw a man she would never forget. Diego Rivera, a famous mural painter 20 years older than her. He was painting a mural at her school. She stood and watched him. He was large, wild, loud, and full of passion. Frida whispered to a friend, "I'm going to marry him someday." She laughed when she said it, but she had no idea how true that would become. On September 17th, 1925, everything changed. Frida and her boyfriend Alejandro were taking a bus home. The bus was packed. She sat beside a window. Suddenly, a streetcar smashed into the bus. The metal twisted. People screamed. Blood was everywhere. Frida's body was pierced by a metal handrail. It went through her pelvis. Her spine was broken in 3 places, her leg shattered, her shoulder dislocated. She was just 18 years old. They thought she would die, but she didn't. She opened her eyes and said nothing, because the pain was louder than words. Frida was taken to the hospital. Doctors did surgery after surgery. She couldn't walk, couldn't sit, couldn't move. She was trapped in a body that betrayed her. But she had something the accident couldn't break: her fire. While lying flat in bed, her father gave her a mirror and paints. He put a canopy over her bed and hung a mirror on the ceiling. Frida looked up and saw herself, broken, scarred, alive. So she began to paint herself. Not because she was vain, but because she had no one else to paint. "I paint myself because I am so often alone," she said, "and because I am the subject I know best." In that bed, with her body in pain and a brush in her hand, Frida Kahlo was born again. Her dreams of becoming a doctor were gone, but she found a new medicine: art. She poured her pain onto the canvas, not to make people smile, but to make them feel. She once said, "My painting carries with it the message of pain." But inside that pain, there was beauty. There was truth. There was Frida. And the world was about to notice. Part 2. The fire called Diego. Frida Kahlo had survived death. She had survived pain. And now, she was discovering her new life as an artist. She started painting more and more. Self-portraits, bold colors, dreams, nightmares, emotions. She wasn't painting flowers or pretty views. She was painting her heart. And her heart was full of scars. She once said, "I never paint dreams or nightmares. I paint my own reality." And in that reality, there was one name: Diego Rivera. In 1927, Frida finally got out of bed. She was weak, she walked with a limp, her body still ached. But her eyes were full of fire. She took her paintings and went straight to Diego Rivera, the famous artist she had seen years ago in her school. He was working on a mural at the Ministry of Education. "I have not come to flirt. I have come to show you my paintings. I want to know if they're worth anything." Diego looked at her, surprised. He smiled, and when he looked at her paintings, he saw something no one else saw. He said, "She's an authentic artist." From that moment, something began between them. Not just art, not just interest, something wild. In 1929, Frida Kahlo married Diego Rivera. She was 22. He was 42. He was big, loud, famous, and already had been married twice. He had children, lovers, and a terrible reputation with women. People told Frida, "Don't marry him. He will destroy you." But she didn't listen. She said, "I've suffered two great accidents in my life. One was the bus, the other was Diego." That quote would become legendary. Their love was full of passion, art, politics, and pain. Frida once said, "Diego was everything: my child, my lover, my universe, my pain." They traveled to America, to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. Diego was painting giant murals everywhere. He was respected, powerful, praised. But Frida, she was different. She was small, dressed in Mexican clothes, bold, outspoken, and totally unique. People in America looked at her with surprise, but they couldn't ignore her. She wore colorful dresses, flower crowns, big jewelry, and walked with a strength they couldn't explain. In every city she painted. She painted her face. She painted her thoughts. She painted her losses. While living in Detroit, Frida became pregnant. She was filled with hope. She wanted to be a mother more than anything, but her body was not ready. She had a miscarriage. She lost the baby, and the pain shattered her again. She painted her grief. One of her most emotional works is called Henry Ford Hospital. It shows her lying in a hospital bed, bleeding, crying, and surrounded by images of a baby, her body, and her sadness. It was raw, it was brutal, it was honest, as if losing her child wasn't enough. Frida's heart was broken again. Diego cheated on her, not just with strangers, but with her own sister, Christina. This betrayal cut deeper than anything. Frida was destroyed. She cut her long hair. She wore men's suits in her self-portraits. She drank. She cried. She screamed. But she didn't stop painting. She painted her anger, her broken heart, her disappointment. One of her most famous paintings is A Few Small Nips. It shows a woman lying in blood, stabbed by her lover. It wasn't just art, it was her truth. In 1939, Frida and Diego got divorced. Everyone thought, now she will disappear. But no, this was when Frida truly rose. She began wearing her pain like a crown. She said, I am my own muse. I am the subject I know best. I am the subject I want to better. She had affairs with men, with women. She laughed, painted, smoked, drank, danced. She was alive, in her own way. That same year, she painted one of her greatest works, The Two Fridas. It shows two versions of herself, one with a bleeding heart, one holding her pain with pride. It was Frida, divided between love and loss. Strangely, Diego couldn't live without her. In 1940, just a year after their divorce, they got married again. But this time, Frida was different. She no longer needed him to survive. She had found herself, and the world was beginning to see her. Frida started having exhibitions in New York, Paris, and Mexico. She met Picasso. He admired her. She met André Breton, a surrealist, who said, Frida's art is like a ribbon around a bomb. The world finally saw what she had been painting all along. Not just pretty pictures, but pain, power, truth. Even while the world clapped, Frida's body was getting worse. Her spine was collapsing. Her right leg had gangrene. She had more than 30 surgeries. She wore metal corsets to stay upright. She lived with pain every single day. But she painted through it. She smiled through it. She said, I'm not sick, I'm broken, but I am happy as long as I can paint. Frida Kahlo wasn't just surviving. She was burning, bright, and wild. People didn't understand her, but they couldn't look away. Her spine was weakening. Her legs hurt constantly. She had to wear tight, hard corsets made of leather and steel, just to sit upright. Sometimes she couldn't get out of bed. Sometimes she had to paint while lying flat, just like after her bus accident. She was now in her 30s, young by the world's eyes, but old with pain. She once said, pain, pleasure, and death are no more than a process for existence. To most people, that sounded like poetry, but for Frida, it was her daily truth. She would laugh loudly and then cry silently when no one was watching. But through it all, she kept painting. She said, painting completed my life. As the world noticed her art, Mexico began to see her differently. She was no longer just Diego's wife. She was becoming a national icon. Why? Because she was everything Mexico wanted to celebrate. A strong woman, proud of her roots, dressed in traditional Tijuana clothing, unafraid of politics, unapologetic in her truth. She painted with Mexican colors, bold reds, greens, yellows. She used symbols like monkeys, skeletons, hearts, thorns, and Aztec gods. She was like a living painting, loud, fearless, indigenous, proud. While many Mexican artists wanted to become more European, Frida wanted to become more Mexican. She said, I am more Mexican than the mole sauce in my veins. and that pride made people fall in love with her. By the mid-1940s, Frida had a secret. She had begun taking strong pain medicines, morphine, codeine, just to sleep, just to move. She smiled in public. But at night, she was often screaming in pain, unable to walk, sometimes unable to sit. Her hands trembled, but she kept painting. She even painted her corsets, turning her torture into art. Each brushstroke said, "I'm still here." In 1943, she was invited to teach at La Esmeralda, the prestigious art school in Mexico City. Her students were young, passionate, and loved her deeply. They called themselves Los Fridos, the Fridas. They followed her everywhere, listened to every word, copied her art. But sometimes, Frida couldn't make it to class, so her students came to her house, La Casa Azul, the Blue House. They sat on the floor. She taught from her bed. She spoke of color, pain, and truth. She didn't teach rules. She taught soul. "Don't paint the surface," she said. "Paint what hurts." Though married again to Diego, their relationship was still full of fire. They loved each other, but they also hurt each other. Both had affairs, both were jealous, both were tied together by a bond no one understood. Diego once said, "I loved Frida like a volcano loves the sky, with fire, with ash, with smoke." They fought, made up, hurt each other, and stayed together. Because somehow, they were each other's home. But even love could not protect Frida from what was coming. In 1953, Frida's right leg became infected. Doctors said the infection was spreading fast. If they didn't act, it would kill her. So they did the unthinkable. They cut off her leg. Frida, the girl who once climbed trees, ran like a wild cat, danced at parties, now had only one leg. She was 46 years old. It broke her, not just physically, but emotionally. She wore a wooden leg with a red boot, stylish, strong, bold. But inside, she was devastated. She wrote in her diary, "Feet, what do I need you for when I have wings to fly?" Her words were beautiful, but they hid the darkness inside, even with one leg, even with her spine collapsing, even while taking morphine every day. Frida refused to stop. She painted even more. She wore flowers in her hair. She hosted friends. She wrote poetry. And in that same year, 1953, something unbelievable happened. Her first solo exhibition in Mexico. Yes, after nearly 30 years of pain, Frida was finally given her first solo art show in her own country. But her body was too weak to walk. Doctors told her, "You must stay in bed. You cannot attend." Frida laughed. She said, "They want to stop me from living? Let them try." She wore her most colorful dress, put flowers in her hair, put on her red lipstick, and she arrived at the gallery in an ambulance. They carried her in on her hospital bed. They placed her bed in the center of the room. She lay there like a queen, surrounded by her paintings. The guests were shocked. Then they clapped and cried, because they weren't just seeing art, they were seeing courage. A woman who had every reason to stay hidden chose instead to celebrate life. Frida lifted her glass and toasted. "I am not sick, I am broken, but I am happy to be alive as long as I can paint." The world saw her pain and called it art. But more than that, they saw her spirit. Unstoppable, unshakable. Frida Kahlo. After the 1953 exhibition, where Frida arrived on a hospital bed and shocked the world, something strange began to happen. People looked at her differently. They no longer just saw the paintings. They saw her. They saw a woman who had lost her child, her leg, her health, but still showed up with red lipstick, flowers in her hair, and a smile full of defiance. They saw a woman who refused to become silent. A woman who chose art over shame, color over pain, power over pity. And for the first time, Frida Kahlo was not just an artist. She was becoming a symbol. In 1954, something was burning inside Frida. Not just pain, but rage. She saw injustice. She saw women being controlled. She saw poor people ignored. She saw power in the hands of cruel men. Frida never stayed quiet. She joined protests, wrote angry letters, painted with louder colors. She spoke against war. She spoke against imperialism. She supported the poor, the disabled, the broken. Even in her fragile body, Frida became a storm. They tried to silence me, she wrote, but I painted louder. She waved red flags. She marched in her wheelchair. She lifted her voice even when her hands were shaking. People began calling her not just an artist, but a revolutionary soul. At home, Frida was still with Diego. Their love had become complicated. They didn't live like a normal couple. They lived in two separate houses, connected by a small bridge. They both had other lovers. They both argued, yelled, and sometimes didn't speak for days. But deep inside, Frida still loved him, like a wound that never closed. She once wrote in her diary, "Diego, nothing compares to your hands, nothing like the green gold of your eyes. My body aches for you." She even said, "I cannot love without pain." And Diego? He loved her too, but he didn't know how to stop hurting her. It was a love story, not of perfection, but of chaos, scars, and truth. In her final years, Frida began writing a diary, pages full of poems, drawings, secrets, and fear. She wrote with red ink, black ink, blood colors. Sometimes her words were clear. Sometimes they looked like she was crying while writing. She wrote things like, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. They amputated my leg. They gave me fake hope. I bleed inside. I paint flowers so they don't die." She drew hearts with cracks, doves without wings, and self-portraits with thorns around her neck. Her diary wasn't just a notebook. It was her soul, falling onto paper. Frida was now in constant pain. She couldn't sit for long. She couldn't sleep. She cried while laughing. She whispered to her nurses, "Just help me paint, and I'll be okay." Every time the world thought she would finally stop, she painted again. Even if she had to be held up by pillows, even if she had to use her left hand when her right one shook. She painted until the pain became too strong to hold a brush. In her last year, Frida painted one of her most famous works, Viva la Vida, Long Live Life, a painting of bright red watermelons with the words written in bold, Viva la Vida. She painted it while in bed, surrounded by pain, tears, and silence. It was her last scream, a scream that said, "Even now, I choose life. I choose color. I choose to leave something beautiful behind." That painting is now in museums across the world. People stand in front of it and cry without words. Because it was not just art. It was Frida's goodbye. In July 1954, just 11 days before her death, Frida did something no one expected. Even though she was weak, in pain, and could barely move, she joined one last protest against the U.S. government for invading Guatemala. She told her nurse, "I must go, even if I die." She was wheeled into the crowd, waving a red flag, surrounded by people chanting for justice. People stared. Some cried. because they saw a woman who had lost everything, still showing up to fight for others. It was her final public appearance. The world didn't know, but Frida Kahlo had just said her last goodbye to the streets she loved. Back home, in La Casa Azul, the Blue House, Frida stopped talking much. She looked at the sky for hours. She wrote poetry. She stared at her old paintings. She listened to Diego walking in the next room. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She just waited. In her final diary entry, she wrote, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." She smiled at her nurses. She held Diego's hand. And on July 13th, 1954, Frida Kahlo closed her eyes. But this is not where her story ends, because legends don't end when they die. They begin. Part 3. The Woman Who Became Immortal. Frida Kahlo died on July 13th, 1954, at the age of 47. Her body was taken from La Casa Azul, her bright blue home in Coyoacan, to a quiet funeral. Few people came. There was no massive crowd, no international news, no awards, no red carpets, no headlines shouting her name. The woman who had lived in pain, painted her truth, and arrived at her last exhibition in a hospital bed, was buried with silence. Her body was cremated. Her ashes were placed in a pre-Columbian urn shaped like a toad, because Diego had once called her his little toad. She was gone. But something was still burning in the air, something the world had not yet seen, something that refused to stay silent. For many years after her death, Frida's name was nearly forgotten. Museums were quiet about her. Art critics focused on men. Even Diego, her famous husband, continued to be celebrated, while Frida remained in the background. People didn't understand her art. They said it was too personal, too painful, too emotional. But what they didn't know was that those emotions would one day wake up the world. In the 1970s, something began to change. A new generation of people, especially young women, artists, poets, and activists, discovered her paintings, her diary, and her story. They didn't just see art. They saw themselves. Frida had become a mirror for women who felt unheard, for people living with pain, for outsiders, rebels, dreamers, for those who were told, "You're too much" or "You're not enough." Frida became their voice, and the world finally started asking, who was this woman with the thick eyebrows, flower crown, and burning eyes? By the 1980s and 1990s, Frida Kahlo exploded into global fame. Her face appeared on magazine covers. Her paintings were shown in major museums around the world. Her diary was published and translated into dozens of languages. She became a fashion icon, a symbol of strength, and an artistic legend. Suddenly, people from Tokyo to London, Paris to New York, Buenos Aires to Berlin, were talking about Frida Kahlo. Her words were printed on walls, her quotes were painted on buses, her life was taught in schools, and the world didn't just want her story, they wanted her art. Frida's paintings, which once sat quietly in her home, began to sell for millions of dollars. Here are just a few. Diego and I. A haunting portrait of herself with Diego's face on her forehead. Sold for $34.9 million in 2021 at Sotheby's auction. This became the most expensive artwork ever sold by a Latin American artist. Two nudes in a forest sold for $8 million. Roots, another deeply personal work, sold for $5.6 million. From being ignored to becoming one of the most valuable female painters in history. the same paintings she made in bed while bleeding, crying, shaking, are now worth more than diamonds. But their true value is not money. Their value is in what they gave to the world. Today, Frida's face is everywhere. T-shirts, notebooks, jewelry, murals, tattoos. Her face is on postage stamps in Mexico. She has been featured in Barbie dolls, Netflix documentaries, and Oscar-nominated films. Salma Hayek even played her in the film Frida, 2002, a movie that was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. Frida, who once said, "I never paint dreams, I paint my own reality," became the dream of millions. Frida's house, La Casa Azul, is now a museum. It receives over 1.2 million visitors every year. People travel from every part of the world just to see her bedroom, touch her brushes, walk in her garden, feel her energy in the walls, cry in front of her wheelchair. It's not just a museum, it's a temple of courage. Frida is remembered not because she smiled through the pain, but because she showed the pain and still chose to live. She showed her scars. She embraced her body. She said things other people were afraid to say. She didn't care about being polite. She cared about being real. She once said, "They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." And that's why her story will never die. Because in every girl who's been broken, in every person living with pain, in every soul that has been betrayed, lost, or told to stay silent, Frida whispers, "You are not alone, and you are still beautiful." Frida's story is not just about painting. It's about fighting. Fighting for love. Fighting for art. Fighting for your voice, even when the world tries to shut it down. She was born into a world that wanted women to be quiet. She screamed with color. She lived with a broken spine. But she stood taller than kings. She died young, but became eternal. Frida once said, "At the end of the day, we can endure much more than we think we can. And maybe that's the truth we all need. Your pain does not make you weak. It makes you powerful." So now you know the truth. Frida Kahlo didn't have a perfect life. She didn't have perfect health. She didn't have perfect love. But still, she lived with fire. She painted her pain. And she turned her broken pieces into something the world would never forget. That's the lesson you must carry. Your pain is not the end. Your pain can become your story. Your story can become your power. And your power can touch millions. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have everything figured out. Just start with what you have, even if it's pain, even if it's tears, even if all you have left is one small hope inside you. Protect it. Fight for it. Because you don't know who you can become until you refuse to quit. Frida didn't quit, and neither will you. So whatever you're going through, remember this. Your scars are proof that you survived, and your voice deserves to be heard. If Frida's story touched your heart, if it gave you hope, if it reminded you that you're stronger than you think, then subscribe to this channel right now, because I promise you, I'm not just here to teach English. I'm here to remind you, you matter. Your story matters, and your voice is powerful. We're not just building language here, we're building courage. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful biographies that teach you English through the language of life. So stay with us. You are not alone, and I'll see you in the next video. With love, from your big brother.